Welcome back again. This lesson is about navigation controllers. And navigation controllers are kind of a fundamental navigation method of iOS. That's something that you see in most of the applications, and despite being so widely used, is actually quite simple to implement. So let's go ahead into Xcode, and I'm going to start a new application called Navigation Controller app. Now in my navigation controller app, I have to head to my storyboard and add a navigation controller. So usually we have a view controller that is our initial view, and that is set up in here by having that little parameter is initial view controller, or having this little arrow that goes into the view controller. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a navigation controller, embed this view controller within that. So let's first do it the easier way. I'm going to select my view controller, go to editor, go to embed in, and say navigation controller. As you know, you can do the same thing down here. You can go to this little button in here and say embed in a navigation controller. So editor, embed in navigation controller, and what it will do is it will make a navigation controller and it will place our view controller within that navigation controller. And what the navigation controller has, it has a navigation item up there, which is that little bar there that you can add buttons to it. It has a built-in title to it that you can write the name of your view controller in it, or you can have buttons that they do things for you as you navigate between different view controllers. But as the name suggests, it wouldn't do anything on one single view controller. It kind of needs to have more than one view controller. So let's go ahead and add one more. I'm going to select this one, make its background maybe a kind of a green, so I know which one this is. Then I'm going to add a new view controller. This new view controller, I'm going to place it here. And this one, I'm going to give it a background that is some sort of a pink. And then I'm going to add a button. Let me change that to a different mode, button. And this button, I'm going to go ahead and say, this one takes us to the pink. So it says, go to pink. And now let's go ahead and add a segue between the pink button and the pink view controller. Control drag. And I'm going to use the show method, which is the default method of segue within navigation controllers. The moment I do that, my pink view controller also receives the bar on the top as well as a back button. Now let's go ahead and run this application. Keep in mind that I'm designing for iPhone 8, a mistake that I always do, and I'm simulating an iPhone XS, which means I'm going to have some misplacement essentially. Some things are not going to be in the right place. But for this exercise, it doesn't really matter. So now when I press on the pink, we get navigated to the pink view controller. The pink view controller appears from the right side of the screen, it slides itself in, and also it has a built-in back button that shows me how we can go back. Now let's change a few things in here and learn a little bit more. So the first thing is I'm going to go in here and say, when we land on any of these view controllers, I want to see their title. So for the view controller, which is our green view controller, actually I'm going to change the names so they're more explanatory. So that's a green view controller. I'm also going to change the name of the file, even though it doesn't really matter, but it's better that you have names that are relevant to what they are. So that's my green view controller. I'm going to add a new view controller. So that's the subclass of UI view controller called pink view controller. So that's my next class. And in my storyboard, I'm going to say this one is connected to the green view controller. And of course, my pink one is with pink. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to go to green view controller. The only thing I'm going to change is this. Within the view did load, I'm going to say self.title, say green. And I'm going to do the exact same thing in the pink. So in the pink, I'm going to get rid of everyone, reformat everything properly, get rid of all the other code so it's clean and tidy, and say self.title becomes pink. And let's run the application again. And this time we should be able to see a title on the top center corner of the bar of the navigation item for the green, as well as another one for the pink. Now, the next thing that we might wonder is, how can I actually add buttons in here? What if I wanted to have a little button on the far right corner of the bar here in the green view controller? So I'm going to go to the green view controller up in here. I have something called self.navigationItem.right bar button item, which is asking me for a UI bar button item. So let's first make that. So I'm going to say, let's call it my right bar button. It's a UI bar button item. And that, I'm going to build it like this. I'm going to go ahead and say, it has a type, so that's going to be a UR by button item system dot, and I'm going to make it look like a maybe a camera, even though I'm not really going to do anything with it, but maybe it looks like a camera. And then the target is obviously here, and the action is selector, and we have to add an action for it. For the action of it, I'm going to say there is a function called camera action. And this is something that we have done many times before. This is an Objective-C, add Objective-C, and within its body it does something. So I'm going to add the camera action to my selector, and because of the formatting, I'm actually going to remove this first part. I'm only using the shorthand dot operation. So that's something you can do in Swift. I don't really personally like it, and I usually don't do it, but since I'm trying to zoom into the screen, I'm actually going to stay with that. So that's a UR by button item dot style dot cam, or UI bar button item dot system item dot camera. So let's remove that, and then of course my right button becomes this one, and now everything is working the way we were hoping it will be. I still have one error, and it is saying it's called right button. Okay, so I've got my button, and it is placed in the place of the right bar button item of my navigation item, and every time we tap on it, this thing will happen. For now, it just says print camera. That's it. Now let's run the application again, and this is how we add buttons to our navigation item. You can have the left one, the right one, as well as you can have the title or the title view. So in here, if I tap on that camera button, it obviously says camera. It prints it in here. The centerpiece, the one that is actually a title right now, it could also be a view. So you can actually have something in it. Let's go ahead to a pink one, and instead of that, I'm actually going to change it to be a UI segmented control. If this was a view that you had two different things happening in it. So I'm going to go in here to the pink and say, I don't want the title. What I do want is this. My segctrl becomes a UI segmented control. And the UI segmented control can be built by a coder, by a rectangle, or by the items. And I'm going to say, let's build it by the items. And the items, I'm going to say there are two items. One of them is called 1, and the other one is called 2. As simple as that. So there are two items. One of them shows the text 1, the other shows the text 2. And then I'm going to say self.navigationItem.title. This time I'm not going to use the title, I'm going to use the title view. So title view is my seg controller. Now let's go ahead and run this application. As simple as that, I will have a segmented control within my title view. Go in here, and now I have those two. Obviously, if you wanted, you could actually add a rect for it. So, you know, if you want to make it wider or larger, you could do it like that. But it works very well like this. I can simply add an action in here using a value changed. and then run a certain function. So these are the basics of using a navigation controller. And like I said, I'm going to show you another way in the storyboard for building navigation controllers which are not based on embedding them. So to do that, here's what we do. We're going to delete the navigation controller. I'm actually going to go up here and say, let's build a navigation controller, which is this one. And I'm going to say, let's drag it in here. And when you drag a navigation controller, by default, it wants to embed a table view controller. And that's not what we want. So I'm going to delete that. Say I only want the navigation controller. And the only thing that really matters in here is what's the relationship between our navigation controller and our green view controller. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say from our navigation controller, we're going to control drag over here. And we're going to say it is the root view controller of our navigation controller. So that's the root view controller. So that segue is essentially a root view controller segue. And of course, I have to make my navigation controller to be the initial view controller. So here it becomes the initial view controller. And now we go back where we used to be. So that's how you would make a manual navigation controller as opposed to embedding an existing view controller within a navigation controller. Both of them, they do exactly the same thing. There's no really difference between them. And finally, one last thing that I have to show you is what does this button actually do, the back button. Let's go ahead and change it so it doesn't say go back to green. Maybe it has a different icon or a different look. And we also understand what is it actually doing. So let's go to the pink. And I'm going to go ahead and say, let LFD bar button become a UR bar button item. And I'm going to build it just like the last time with a button system item. You could make it with that. You could make it with an image, or you could just make it with a title if you wanted to. So this time, again, I'm going to make it with a system button. And let's say that button is actually like a maybe like a cancel, or it says cancel essentially. Once again, I'm going to drop that so I can get it properly formatted. And the format is going to the self, or the action is going to the self, and the selector for it is going for go back action, which we don't have yet, and we have to add it. So I'm going to come in here and say this is an Objective-C function. Function go back doesn't have any arguments, and most importantly, self.navigation item dot left bar button item becomes LFD button item. So now I have my navigation item in the pink view controller to have the segmented controller in the middle and have a left bar button for the place where used to be the back button. If we run the application now, we should be able to see that left bar button is actually replaced with this newly created button. And that is true. It says cancel. But when I press cancel, it doesn't really do anything simply because it doesn't know what it should do. So let's look at that. And this is actually important. So there are two things we could essentially be doing. One of them is saying self.navigation controller dot pop view controller, which essentially does this. It pops the current view controller and goes back to the one before that. Imagine a situation like this. In your storyboard, you have the green one, you have the pink one, and then maybe I have another view controller down in here, and this view controller is maybe a blue view controller. So that looks like that. So this is essentially called a stack of view controllers for a navigation controller. At any point, you might be anywhere in this. So for instance, if I'm in the blue one and there is a segue between them, which is show. So if I'm at the blue and I say pop view controller, I go directly back to the pink one. But again, if I'm at the blue and I want to go back to the root view controller, there is also a way for that. So for that, we could say self.navigation controller pop to root view controller. And with that, essentially we skip anyone in between the stack and we go all the way back to the root view controller. Depending on your situation, you might want to use either of these two. Usually you pop the view controller, so you just go back one step in the stack. And sometimes you want to go back to the very root view controller, and that's quite valid as well. So for now, I'm going to say just pop. And if we run the application again, we should be able to see that the pink view controller now has a back button which is saying cancel, and it does pop to the previous view controller. Then we hit cancel, we end up here. So that was a quick introduction to how to use the UI navigation controllers. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next lesson.